Hello, everyone. Welcome to a brand new episode of Say Again, a podcast I kicked off last year. And I'm delighted to have on today in conversation with me Safi Rizvi, advisor to the National Disaster Management Authority with additional charge. He's also the executive director of the National Institute of Disaster Management. Safi, thank you so much for taking out the time.
Thank you. Thank you for calling me. I am honored that you have invited me. Thank you.
And I am so happy that we could survive all our various tech glitches. I'm not going to jinx us, but we'll dive straight into our conversation. I was looking up Safi's background, as research for this, Safi, and there's so much about your career I was not aware of. So just to give a quick highlight, when we were talking before this chat, Safi shared that, over 36 years of his career, he's actually had 4 careers. So that's going to be really interesting for us to think through in terms of transitions, how you manage that. A lot of it has been very, very intense. Safi actually started out in the private sector, but joined the IPS. He's from the 1989 batch of the IPS. He was also a special director of the IB, and then the designations we just shared. Safi, I also did not know that you'd been decorated with several medals: Indian Police Medal for Meritorious Services, the President's Police Medal for Distinguished Services, and the Extraordinary Intelligence Services Medal. So huge belated congrats. And I did not know this. And I think if you were a journalist, that would have been the calling card. It's pretty incredible to see and read. But let me start by asking you, and just giving you a sense of, on the podcast, we love to talk to leaders and change makers about their domain expertise. And then towards the back half, we'll ask you a little bit about, your own career, your leadership choices, and how you've kind of sort of looked at success and failure all these years, if that works for you.
Yeah, perfectly. So, how do you want to start?
Let me kick off by asking you. So, when you say National Disaster Management Authority, and I was just thinking through, for most of us in India, sitting and thinking about natural disasters, it's either terrible headlines, flash floods, earthquakes, typhoons, man-made elements to a lot of the destruction going on. So as you approach this, what are some of the maybe long-term strategies to mitigate? Where is AI playing a role, if at all? Can you give us a little bit of sort of context and your role here?
So, disaster is essentially a hazard, a natural hazard, converted into something that costs lives or it destroys property or public utilities. So that is what a disaster is all about. So, Government of India has 4 institutions for managing disasters. The NDMA is the policy making body, the National Disaster Management Authority. It was created by an act, Disaster Management Act in 2005. Then there is NIDM, which is the National Institute of Disaster Management, which is for training and capacity building and community awareness. And then third, you have NDRF, the persons in orange suits, the National Disaster Response Force. So they are the ones you see on television when there's a disaster. So they're there to help out and help save people. And fourthly, we have the DG of Fire Service, Civil Defense, and Home Guards. So that's the volunteer force. It's a massive volunteer force of, I think, at least 1.2 million. That's the general umbrella of disaster management in India. And this is the institutional aspect. Then the activity aspect is that we look at all the 12 or 13 hazards that are there across India. Almost every hazard exists in India, and the impact of it. So then you either look at response, you look at reconstruction after a disaster, and before a disaster, you look at mitigation and preparedness and capacity building. So that's the activity side. And the third and final side is the financial side. So the 15th Finance Commission, which we are in the 5th year of that now, came up with a $35 billion program for these 5 years, in which you have 4 windows for prevention and mitigation, preparedness, and then for response, and then for reconstruction. So it's all very well structured. And the negativity of the fact that you're always in the news only when there is a disaster and property is being lost or lives are being lost, that is the nature of our job. I mean, it's like the police officer's job, where at the end of the day, if there is a crime, a terrorist crime, people say, oh, the police should have been doing something. But people kind of forget that there are 99 times where the police succeeds and the terrorist needs to succeed once. So in disasters, at least the ratio is even worse, that the disaster will succeed maybe 50% of the time and we will succeed 50% of the time. So our effort is always to enhance that 50% and try and reduce the risk from disasters as we go along. That's the general overview of disaster management.
And I will ask you a little bit more about, to unpack for us. As we speak, it's the middle of summer. I was reading some of these headlines that India isn't as hot as it might be because of the pollution, which I feel like for many of us is like, what is going on? But, talk to us a little bit about extreme heat stress. I was reading a piece you wrote recently. We linked to this in the show notes in the Economic Times when you were talking about heat inequity, some long-term solutions that you guys are working on to sort of mitigate here as well. And again, is there a role that AI is playing in all of this in terms of pattern recognition, in terms of data analysis, or anything you can share?
So excellent. That's a super point because heat waves, we call them, that's a listed disaster now. Formally, you can spend funds on it. And if the government of India and the state governments are allowed to spend funds from the mitigation fund for heat, that allows cities to make heat action plans. Once you make a heat action plan, then the city knows in which ward heat stress is higher whenever there is a heat wave. So they know which of the 7 wards out of the X number of wards in a city need to be focused on much more. So what do you do to mitigate? So over the years, even before heat action plans were made, district magistrates always used to put out just before the heat season kind of an advisory that schools should be shut early. Maybe some holidays are extended by 7 days, 15 days, or you are told that construction should not happen during these hours in the day. And then cooling shelters are provided and water coolers are provided. Matkas were provided, the natural way of dealing with it. So, wearing headgear, these are all very simple ways that people forget. Most people in Delhi don't wear headgear, but fact is, it saves you a lot of direct radiation if you do that. So that is where heat wave mitigation comes in. But long-term plans and heat equity is a very important aspect. What happens is that all the unorganized labor or the unskilled construction labor or factory workers who are not very skilled or maybe semi-skilled, they work in conditions of heat. Their factories may be much hotter than even the sun outside. So suppose it's above 43 degrees Celsius and humidity is high. So the two together act and enhance the felt heat factor much more. So in that case, they may not go to work or their establishment might shut down and say for 3 days, stay at home. They lose 3 days of wages. For that, we've initiated discussions with several companies, Indian or overseas public sector, to start parametric insurance programs for heat stress. So some organizations have already done so. They're in their third phase where they have a simple program. Parametric means threshold based. So if for 3 days running, 43 degrees Celsius and above, then each worker who has paid some premium towards that policy will get an X amount of money for that day of work lost. So it's a very simple scheme. There is no indemnification, no verification required, but it at least gives a bit of a breather to all the workers. There was a very good study by the Indian Statistical Institute, Professor E. Somanathan. He has proven that for every 1 degree increase in the average heat over a 2 month period in slums in Delhi, the workers on average lose 6% of their income. So 3 degrees, they lose on an average 18% of their income. So there is a need to ensure these workers. So if self-help groups can initiate and do it, or the companies where they work, the construction companies can do it, it will be a great contribution to heat equity.
Interesting. And as I said, we link to the article that you had written in the Economic Times. And if there are any other resources you'd like us to share, that could be interesting for the reading. But we'll switch gears a little bit and ask you, Safi, as an IPS officer, being part of the security establishment, I'm going to give you a soft question first, I think, and build up to what I want to ask you. The soft one is, what are some of the misconceptions that you'd like to dispel? Because you kind of alluded to this earlier when you said, when people criticize, for example, or are critical of security forces when terrible things happen, we're not actually realizing all the times that lives have been saved, for example. Are there any misconceptions that you'd like to
Several. But before I go there, I forgot to respond to your AI question. That's a very important point. So just specifically on heat, the Indian Meteorological Department puts out a lot of open data on maximum temperature, minimum temperature at every location where they have sensors, and they have several sensors. They put out wind data. That's the third aspect. They put out data on moisture, which is humidity, fourth aspect. So when these four aspects are seen together, and so you can predict, not really predict, you can look at the trends on whether a hot day is followed by a warm night and whether that warm night is followed by a hot day. if is that two in succession or three in succession. So the number of permutations and combinations of analysis you can do with just these 4 points of hourly data all over the country is massive. The IMD runs a supercomputer model which takes in 233 aspects of these four. So that is where you need AI and machine learning. So if this data is available in public domain, as I wrote in that article in the Economic Times, why doesn't the AI engines that young people are working on, why don't they use it? It's there in the open domain. It can be downloaded. So there is a big gap in disaster management of people using open source data, which is readily available to do analysis. So that's the short answer to that. Now, coming to your IPS question and police question. Yes, there is a serious misconception about the police. It is considered, it comes, they're always being badgered about as if the police guys do nothing. Why has this crime occurred? Why did the police always lands up last wherever some crime happens? At the end of the day, in all the places where the police prevents a crime, there is no visual. When there is no visual and there is no FIR, then nothing has happened as regards what the common public believes and sees. Whereas the police officer on the ground or the intelligence officer who has prevented a terrorist attack knows exactly what happened. But there is no way he can come out and say, I did this. People say, oh, he must be just gassing. So that is a little problem with the job that 1 or 2% do get away. In terrorism, it's a serious thing. So many people die and the country and everybody wants, and even we want 100% perfection, whether it's terrorism, whether it's crime, whether it's prevention of law and order. But at the end of the day, it's all very difficult. How can you reach 100%? But we always strive to. So if today, same for disasters. If in cyclones 25 years ago, we lost 10,000 people in Odisha, and now when a cyclone comes, you don't even lose one people. But yes, now we are working, we scaled up from coming down because we got an early warning for 7 days now. We are able to prevent and get people prepared for the disaster. We are now moving in other directions in various other hazards. So same in the police. So whether it's theft, robbery, burglary, there's a lot of science to how do these things are prevented in urban areas and rural areas. What is the psychology of a criminal? Suppose there's a bank robbery, so you check out their modus operandi. Now it's a blind one. You don't know where they're coming from. So you possibly even wait for them to come again. And maybe they strike a second time and you're that time you're prepared. Earlier you were not prepared. That time you're prepared. Maybe if they repeat the same modus operandi and you've got your teams at the banks where they are likely to target, you just might catch them. I do remember a case like this when I was SP Barabanki in 1995. So the first time they came and hit, Barabanki is a border of Lucknow. So they came and hit, they robbed a bank of a lot of money, which was 30 kilometers inside Barabanki, but 40 kilometers from Lucknow. So the news was that they came on 3 motorcycles, 2 chaps each, they robbed the bank and they went off. So then as with our team, we decided that instead of going after them and knocking on their houses and making them run away and come back another time, let's wait for them again. So every single day we put up teams in plain clothes. On the 14th day, they came again. And obviously they thought these cops are sleeping. They won't do anything. They came again, we chased them and we caught them. We got all the money, we got all 6 of them. So that strategy you have to use, and that is what preparedness and prevention is. But when the crime happened and they were caught, then it became big news.
Yeah.
But suppose we had caught them without them coming for the second time, then it wouldn't have been very big news.
Yeah.
So that's the general issue that you face in this job.
The perception, I mean, the bias of like reporting and the sort of perception of it. Where do you stand on the other, of course, complaint or stressor for people, I think, is how much surveillance there is. So when you look at security versus surveillance, and I have more fun questions for you, Safi, I promise, including on bad faith actors and Gen AI. But where do you think that people are eventually going to make that? Like, I think every society has to take that call at some point, right? Like, we are seeing some cities in the world, like I was told London, I think, is one of them, is amongst the most, has the most surveillance. I'm sure Delhi, Bombay, all of our big cities. And given the nature of the threats, of course, you can understand why. Are you concerned, given how now with sort of the rise of Gen AI, the rise of deep fakes, access to that data, is that a concern that the security establishment is aware of? Misuse of that surveillance data and so on?
Yes, that's a very serious issue. And even when somebody is putting up CCTV cameras in a big way, the police department always takes a look at the fact that this can have serious privacy concerns. However, for everything, there has to be a balance. At the end of the day, if you're putting up security cameras, you're putting them on the main streets, main roads, you're putting up bright lights to keep the roads lit so that it's safe for women and for everybody at night. But at the end of the day, how far do you go? You put CCTVs into everybody's building. Do you put them on the staircases also? Do you put them at people's doors also? So there is a way of discussing both. So it's like a maximization with some constraints. So you want to maximize prevention of crime through these technological means, but there is a restraint, and that is privacy. So that is just for CCTVs. But when you come up to with big data, like private data of say telephones, private data of what you're surfing, all this private data is available to companies. Now, that is a hazard that the company need not be located in India, may not be available to the Indian law agencies in case there's an issue. That is an issue that Indian agencies are always grappling with, and they try their best to get them incorporated in India so that they can work on it. However, there are various other times where this data can be misused by hackers, can be used by non-state actors, can be used by state actors. So that issue with regard to data, it's a massive sea of issues there. It's not just data which is a sea, the issues are also a sea.
Yeah.
So each one has to be looked at case by case. You cannot, and every time you do something new, you take a look at it. If you remember, the e-Vahan had been started for registration numbers. You look at a car number, you enter it, and you get the details. So there it was giving you the person's name, the registrant's name also, and his address also. So that was seen as a violation of privacy. So then the government stopped giving the name and the address, which was a very fine decision. So these kind of nuanced decisions are what is needed. And the balance is, that's the one word I would say. For everything, you need a balance. Even in the green versus development debate, you need a balance.
That's a whole new can of worms that we will open up next time, I think. But, I mean, having worked at, Twitter 1.0 at a very colorful time when a lot of these issues were coming to light, and it was interesting to see how the big tech companies said that a lot of this is not their responsibility, whereas there was so much, that law enforcement agencies and different governments had to work across markets for. I think probably I could write a thesis on that at this stage. But let me ask you, from the point of view of someone who's, from the security establishment, when you, and this is a two-pronged question. One is, for friends and family or people you care about, what is the advice you give them when it comes to things like social media? Because now we do know that it's, easier and easier to have these deep fakes targeting. That there's expected to be a sort of a proliferation of scams. There was, earlier the news about senior citizens being targeted, et cetera, et cetera. One is, if you wanted to give people advice on how best to use social media, how best to keep an eye out so we're not being scammed. And the second part to this is, I think there's the little bit of this increased tension around traveling. There was this, recently Christiane Amanpour, the famous sort of global CNN journalist on a podcast was saying that she herself was stressed out about going to the US for a trip, and she took a burner phone. She didn't take any of her other phones, etc. So, people on the right have been making fun of her for this. But she was saying that for someone who is even a public personality like herself, to think twice about traveling with, because right now all our data is connected, right? So your phone, your laptop. So what are your thoughts on that? And then perhaps some advice for people on how we should be using social media, Gen AI, so that, keeping in mind that these are tools that are there for our convenience rather than allowing us to get exploited ourselves.
So there are a lot of people who have concerns. So there are certain people who are in sensitive jobs. Like those sensitive jobs could be government, could be some sensitive jobs within government, non-sensitive jobs within government. In the private sector, if you are working in the core technology area of an important large company, then you're in a very sensitive job. So this is with regard to the nature of your job. That is one aspect. Second aspect is what does the individual think about his own data? So if the individual one, he may not be aware about his data. A large part of the population is not aware and doesn't really bother because there are normal people working at their jobs and everything. But there are many people who bother, like aware people like yourselves. Now, aware people would want to know that what should I do? Should I use this? Should I use that? So that's friends and families. What advice do I give them? So my advice is that use social media, use things on the phone, on the internet, only when required. So if you need internet banking, like I have a close relative who just swears that I will not do internet banking because all my money could get just whacked by some cyber fraudster. So yes, that is a concern because there are serious cases like that. However, for internet banking to get hacked has not really happened. What gets hacked is the OTP. Somebody cons you, takes the OTP out of you, and then hacks you. So essentially, it's a cheating or a defrauding or a fooling kind of scam. Now, this is the kind of scam that goes on, not the fact that somebody is hacking into your bank's website and then getting your password and doing it. So there is a balance you have to make if you're an aware person and you're worried about it. That's with regard to your own money. Social media, Twitter, Instagram, and whatever, you're putting out a lot about yourself. With latest technology, which is available to the open source in state among state actors, non-state actors, general stalkers, especially for personal privacy, especially for young girls, it's a very serious issue. The amount of data the young kids put out on social media. There it is for their parents to advise their school, their university, their peer group. And I do understand that a lot of the young people are fairly well aware of this, that you should not put out too much. And their friends tell them, don't do this, don't put out this, delete this tweet, you put out too much about yourself. So giving real details about your address, where you live, or always showing the address and standing outside your door and taking a selfie and doing an Instagram post is not at all advisable. What is advisable is give out your views. If you like an article, you can post it on Instagram. You can post a reel when you're going out for a walk or whatever. Various things you can do. But just this little thing about personal information, that awareness is very important. That your name, your phone number, your bank account, your Aadhaar card number, your PAN number. These are very secret. Don't tell anybody these five things on the phone. And just anybody asks you, there's something wrong. Banks don't ask you your Aadhaar number or your 30 date of birth on the phone. They don't. It's a fact. So that's the general advice I say, that you have to again use the word balance.
Super. That's actually really helpful. Thank you. Everyone make notes and come back to us if you have any follow-up questions. We'll try and put them to Safi. What do you think of the Christiane Amanpour thing and this travel to the US, given some of the headlines and the news that's been coming out of there?
I am not very sure. Was it right now or was it earlier when she had gone to the US?
She went so she shared this recently that she'd gone to Harvard for a commencement speech. And this is on her podcast called The X-Files. I just saw the clip and she was talking so X-Files, by the way, anyone who wants to watch it, it's Christiane Amanpour with her ex-husband. It's actually quite cool. It's their take on global geopolitics, etc. And so she was saying that it was a recent trip to Harvard for a commencement speech. And given the way that US authorities have been talking about immigration and crackdown on visas, she felt a bit stressed and decided to leave her devices at home and took a burner phone. So I thought, well, that's pretty cool. I mean, she thought ahead. But of course, then you have, right-wing commentators in the US saying it's just a bit of a gimmick and headline grab. But your take? And secondly, when people are traveling nowadays, there's a lot of interest being paid. I think it has always been paid, though, correct me if I'm wrong, to post, like when people are applying for visas, there's a lot of background checks that happen anyway. Is there something you would recommend here just for people to be a bit careful about?
Yeah, I mean, countries are now, a lot of countries are getting very kind of iffy about the kind of things you say or do before you come to their country, and that decides their visa policy and all that. But I somehow feel they don't do it on such a mass scale. My personal sense is that it is done in cases of specific people who they wish to look at closely. And as regards Christiane Amanpour, she's such a famous name. And for her to take a burner phone and then say it, it highlights the issue fairly well. So that's what the conservatives are saying in the US does have a ring of truth there. But her intention as to why she did it may not be this. Her intention may be, as she says it, that she was scared that her phones and all would be hacked and all that. So, I mean, if they need to be hacked, they can be hacked while she's in London.
I guess seized at immigration.
Yeah, and you don't
Yeah.
need physical access or anything in these times where the internet is just all over the place. If you're using an app which helps you type the correct grammar, you're always online. So if you're always online, then and then you hear all kinds of stories about your phone, even if it's shut right now, is actually listening to you. Alexa, we all know, is an advertised listening to you even when she's quiet and sleep appears to be sleeping. So in this kind of electronic world, you have to be aware that you could be snooped on by your own devices, and that for that you don't need to carry your phone or not carry your phone. The only risk would be that if somebody can grab your phone and take a look at it before the password shuts down.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. I think we're keeping an eye on the time, Safi. I'm going to ask you a little bit now about your sort of career, how you look at leadership success and failure, where you index on empathy, how important do you feel like mental health is, and sort of some of the conversations around that. And this sort of this with this lens of you're having actually gone through, as you said, 4 careers in 36 years. You want to give us a little bit of background for that, and why did you decide to go from the private sector to the government service in the first place that many years ago?
So that's a very interesting thing, and I love telling the story about myself, but not many people want to listen. So now that your Tripathi is asking, I'm very happy. So the thing is, I started off in college and I was studying economics. And then I decided I wanted to do the civil services and basically do something for the larger good, for idealism and all that. But then I needed to finish my graduation and I needed to start off a post graduation. So we decided to take the CAT exam, and some of us we did it together. So we got into all four IIMs we applied. So I joined IIM Ahmedabad. So IIM Ahmedabad was very interesting, and I took the civil services again and did my summer internship with a bank, American Express Bank. Then I got into the IPS. So I was slightly originally disappointed with the IPS. I wanted to get into the IAS or the IFS. But then I joined Grindlay's Bank as a forex trader. I was an investment banker. So I had thought that my dreams to be a civil servant are now over. So I just put it aside. My dad kept saying, take the exam a second time, take the exam a second time. You need not study, just take it. So I took it, I read some notes and all, and I got the IPS again. So that was my destiny. And I saw it for what it was worth only after 1 year at working in the private sector, where I mean, I have serious number of colleagues from my IM fraternity who are in the private sector. They've done very well. But for me personally, at that time, I felt that this is a place where you're making money for a shareholder sitting in Australia, New Zealand, and you're really not doing anything beyond making money except leading a luxurious life, getting a new car, new Maruti 800 every year. This is 89, 90. So a lot of my colleagues at that time, they almost beat me up that you're mad to be leaving this and we'll send you off to this place. That it was just a lot of fun. But I was made up at that time that larger perspective, whether it's the IAS, the IPS or the IFS, that's what you need to do. Idealism needs to take you there. So I joined the IPS, got UP cadre. It was a exhilarating life, especially the training where I was an introvertish kind of, not really introvertish. I was a very studious kind of character, no games, nothing. So the training taught me horse riding, rock climbing, all kinds of games. So I got a lot of confidence in that. So then when you're in the field, doing a horse charge on a raucous crowd, or, kind of leading a lathi charge yourself, leading a tear gas thing and keeping the streets clear of an unruly mob, all these things enhance your confidence, teach you leadership, that if you don't lead from the front, you get nowhere in life. Crazy events and instances. And then that was national security at the state level, physical national policing security. Then I got this chance to work in the IB for 18 years. So that was national level security at the national level of a completely invisible kind, where I mean, even I can't talk about those 18 years of my life, which was so fruitful, so satisfying, that if I have to go through life again, I would love to go through the same cycle again, because those 18 years were really fantastic. They were the best part of my 36-year career, and I really value that. Then I got this opportunity. I've been here for 2 years, and so in NDMA, and this is the civilian part of Government of India. So it's given me a completely new perspective, completely away from the security establishment, totally within civilian government, and dealing with a concept of climate and disasters which is there to stay. So it's been a fascinating ride over these 4 careers, and I'm still in service by the grace of God. I was happy to have joined young. So it's been a lovely time. Now, as regards leadership, so having seen leadership as a subordinate in the private sector, having seen leaders there, having seen leadership as yourself, growing as a leader at the age of 26, 27, they give you charge of a district and you are in charge of 4,000 policemen and a 3 million population. It's a great responsibility on very young shoulders. That is where we learn on the fly what leadership is all about. Leadership is definitely not about position power. It is a lot about personal power. if you do not have good quality relations with your subordinates and your colleagues, there is no way in hell you can perform beyond 5 on 10. If you're an ekla chalo re person, you will never be a good leader. If you share the successes with all your team, you will be a great leader. And if you do not, then nobody will respect you and you will never be able to achieve task number 2 properly. The same thing I saw in the IB leadership by example, leading from the front, even if it's on paper, taking the call and taking the responsibility, even if somebody starts questioning you. Here I'm seeing leadership amongst all the scientific community that I work with, people I'd never worked with. I'd left science after class 10. I was doing economics and commerce. So these people have taught me geology, geography, and glaciology and seismology and hydrology all over again. It's been a lovely experience. And I work with them as a team. I just do not try to feel also that I'm some kind of a senior officer. So that's my short take on leadership. And mental health, most important. I mean, those books that you've written on mental health, I will be an avid reader of those. Currently, I just read the cover. And the mental health, we have an expert here on mental health. So we work on post-disaster mental health stress and how psychological first aid and psychosocial interventions are needed. How not to re-traumatize a victim. Go and ask him, "Kya hua aapke saath?" Don't do that.
Yeah.
You should not re-traumatize. There's several things like that. So we work a fair bit on mental health as well in NDMA.
We need to do a training session for the media, I think, in that case, my favorite tribe, given what you just said, and probably a separate session with you to follow up on the mental health piece. But Safi, thank you so much for this. I want you to, if you can, share with us, there's a couple of minutes left, final words from you in terms of gratitude. We sometimes wind down with gratitude. Something you're grateful for, could be personal, could be professional, anything that you'd like to share.
I am really grateful to all those people, my leaders, who gave me opportunities. Be it in the police department, in the private sector, in the IB, or here, I have had fantastic leadership from people who have given me excellent opportunities. They've allowed me to work at times of my own free will because they knew this guy would not do something out of discipline. And I was always a disciplined boy. I went into school, Christian school, which was very strict on the palms, I would say. So discipline was always there. So I'm great gratitude to all the leaders I worked with. Serious gratitude to the colleagues, the younger colleagues I worked with. Because if it hadn't been for their work, they say it's my guidance, but if it hadn't been for their work, the 50-50 combination would never have worked. So it's like, a great guy working with a great channel, and then the great channel and the great guy separates, then even the channel kind of loses out and the great guy also loses out. So gratitude to these people, human beings, gratitude to my daughter for teaching me. She told me something really nice. She tells me that, "Papa, don't worry. Life is like waves. You have to know that the wave is going to come, then you should ride it. And when the wave is not coming, then you chill and relax and just figure out when the next wave is coming." So, from daughter, from my friends, from my wife, from mom and dad, I have a lot of gratitude to a lot of people. I'm a very sociable person, as you know.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your taking the time for sharing as much as you could, given some of the parameters that you work within, and for your candor. I really appreciate you. Thanks, Safi.
Thanks, Amrita. It was lovely talking to you, and I hope to do that more often. Thank you. Bye.